So what's the connection between I.C.A.C, Tim Ballard and O.U.R scandal, the first Trump administration disaster, and the second one to follow? Well, there's a connection, believe it or not. It's quite an interesting one, and you can add Project 2025 in as a separate category. So, if you've actually read Project 2025, one of the elements of it is to basically allow police to do whatever they want and to really work hard to not make them accountable in any way, which, of course, bodes well for nobody at all, including the police. But this is part of the plan. So, rather than talk about Project 2025, there's plenty of podcasters and others who are out there talking about it right now. It is really, really important to understand that that exists. Midas Touch did a big um, presentation this morning about that, in which they have partisans of Trump, advocates, and close surrogates coming out and said, "Yeah, we lied. Of course it exists. Yeah." And one of the elements, as I've just told you, is to give the police free reign. Well, I want to go back about 10 years or more, and I'll go back a bit more too, and talk a little bit about how during the first Trump administration, the ascendancy of Tim Ballard, who is somebody I'm not going to get into his whole story. Others do that far better, but essentially worked for the government a little bit for the Department of Homeland Security and prepared for them um, basically what amounted to low level work until he decided to write and develop a concept called Operation Underground Railroad, in which he purportedly went as sort of commandos with a bunch of other dudes, and they rescued children from sexual slavery in all its horrible and sordid forms. Well, warp ahead to 2022-23, you can see how that has begun to unravel, perhaps pushed on by Ballard's movie, in which he's portrayed as some demigod hero who actually went out and did great work. With all egomaniacs, however, there is a downside. They seem to ride the crest of their fame and fortune and forget that there are people out there who are children who are hurt, who will grow to adulthood and have something to say about it. And that's apparently what has been happening. Um, what's the connection? Well, there are so many connections. So, as Ballard did his deed, he got a lot of attention. And this is attention from people in the government who had Project 2008 well in mind. This was the project that government put together, which was supposed to rescue all these children and develop a new funding matrix, would invigorate the somewhat feckless and flailing I.C.A.C from the late 80s, where it began in Bedford County here in central Virginia, grew outward. By the 90s, it was something. And to reinvigorate that with funding and money and such. And Tim Ballard comes on the scene, and they're very impressed by what he does. They're impressed with his story, they're impressed with his results, or what appeared to be his results. Now we know that a lot of it was faked, a lot of it was staged, and a lot of these women, as evidenced by Tim Ballard's own text messages with young ladies and underage people who were setting him up too, meaning that they were um, sharing what he said to them when he found that they had been raped, when they had been forced abortions, allegations of forced abortions in Haiti in particular and in other places. They decided to fight back, including Miss Utah of 2004, I think it was. Um, I'm not sure about that date offhand. But suddenly, Tim Ballard's star began to descend and fall. But just prior to that, from about 2016, 2019, everybody wanted to ride that glorious fame that he had developed. Out in his native Utah, the Utah Attorney General's office received between 2006 and 2019 considerable several $1 million worth of grants, um, six figures every year during that time to fight trafficking. They bolstered him. They propped him up whenever they could. They gave him kudos. And of course, that continued on. He was employed to assist I.C.A.C. And through their aggressive and very, very powerful fundraising, based in part on their amazing results, they were able to give money to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, to MECTF, MECTF, the Washington State equivalent, the Missing and Exploited Children Task Force, and many other groups. The Texas I.C.A.C got some money, and some others as well, all getting in on the gravy train. And as police often want to do, and you can't blame them in a way, if they do good work, they want credit for that good work. And so we have an interesting thing. As his ascendancy continued, the money began to pour in. So we're looking at the time somehow where in the 2016-17 or so, he had uh, gained the attention of senior Trump administration officials, who in turn decided to appoint him to the Human Trafficking Task Force. He spoke before congressional committees, and we can see that the funding matrices for I.C.A.C began to rise. I'm looking at 33 grants that they received, for example, in 2008, totaling $16.9 million. Well, the next year they received 127 grants, totaling $70.7 million, a $53.8 million increase. Okay, that does go down in the next couple of years, but it stays pretty consistent within the 25 to $30 million range every single year. Okay, it increases between 2016 2019 even more during Ballard's what we could say his zenith, where it goes from 31,000 in 2016 I.C.A.C funding, to 2017 $45 million, to 2018 $74, to 2019 $120 million. Now, correlation is not necessarily causation, but we do know that Ballard gave money to all these groups. Ballard recommended not only particular funding patterns, but also he recommended certain training to I.C.A.C training modules. So the training on child exploitation, the training on how to um, find the bad guys in the jungle, how to do some online stuff. Um, he did a lot of different trainings, and I won't lie to you and say that I know absolutely everything about every bit of his training. Not here to do that. I'm here to put the links together and to demonstrate that they were significant over time. The allegations began to uh, fall apart in 2022 or so, and even before that, The Wire did an article. Vox News did a lot of investigation. But before I get to that, I want to back up and go back to the beginning, because I.C.A.C has never been very open with their funding. It's taken quite a lot to get all this information out there. But I want to point out in 2019, 18, I submitted a request in October for a FOIA information request. I wanted to know exactly what I.C.A.C, what they had in their application. I don't want to see the grants. I already had that. I wanted to see what they asked for in their application and how the application request changed, because that would suggest that they were changing conditions along the way. It would also suggest something I had found on the Department of Justice Bureau of Juvenile Justice Systems, or Statistics, I think it was, website, where I found a letter, a memo that when I inquired about it, the memo vanished. And the memo was really government supervisors of these various programs scolding I.C.A.C for spending all of its time in online profiles and going after people like me, that is setting a crime, developing crime around a person, and then reeling them in, regardless of whether they actually intended to do harm or not. This is significant because I.C.A.C needed to get as much um, purchase for their purchase. And they need to look at all the different ways that they could do it. and they weren't always getting the numbers that they wanted. Well, it took me many, many months to get it. And finally, in a letter from February 15th, 2019, okay, where I had made this request all the way down through my discussion with a certain Ralph Foote, who worked with the Office of Justice Programs, they determined that they didn't have that information or they could not make it available to me. Now, this was the start of COVID, and many of these offices were closed. I did call the I.C.A.C office. I did get someone. It was routed to a person in their home, and this person, when they found out I was asking about specifics for the grants, specifics for what they had done differently, for what their specific programs were, even though it's public money, they clammed up right away. The woman said to me, "What do you want? You can't have any of that. What are you doing with that? That's illegal that you're having that." I said, "I don't think so. We got it through a FOIA request, but I did not get this other part." And she promptly hung up the phone. So that was again in 2019, 2020. I pursued those leads. So I.C.A.C was very suspicious. I.C.A.C did not like anybody looking into any of their information. And so you can imagine, though, they still need to get these statistics up. So they partnered apparently with people like organizations like O.U.R and people like Tim Ballard. So you can look here at another group of emails here that I received from some of our people looking into it. um, they really have a lot of things blowing up as celebrities like Ashton Kutcher and Naomi Campbell came out getting on it because apparently it would help their careers, maybe raise their profile. I don't know, but finding out that those two were uh, dubious, to be kind, dubious activities, and that they were not uh, doing anything but getting their own hands dirty and tainting it because they began to get sucked into the vortex of child trafficking. As more people came forward and said, no, Ballard is not a hero. He trafficked me. He had sex with me when I was just a young kid. And no, he is not a hero. And no, they don't do this. And yes, they do stage these events. And yes, they do it for continuing money, etc. When you look at the I.C.A.C stats, of which I have here, it's very, very revealing. And you can see why they might have been open to this. If you go to even 2021, they had cyber tips of 5,108. That led to 1,186 unfounded complaints, another couple hundred in suspensions, about 129 were browbeaten into plea deals. Please see my video on how plea deals are gotten. Very often, despite what you hear about these well-intentioned former prosecutors and all of these podcasts, they never tell you that they got the plea deal because often they held so much over the other person's head that they had to knuckle under no matter what. I was fortunate because I pled not guilty, and due to a couple of errors on their part, I was able to avoid a horrible plea deal. I don't know what I would have done, but I have great sympathy for those who had 300 years over their head, 100 years, 75 years over their head, and pled guilty to 5 or 10 in a lesser charge because otherwise their lives would be destroyed for doing nothing. You have to understand they did nothing but put themselves in a position where police wove a crime around them. I say put themselves in the position because they were acting lawfully and they still ended up being nailed. And so you can say, as some of my detractors have said, well, they shouldn't have been there. They shouldn't have talked to somebody that later was telling them that they were a minor. Well, I've explained why that might be reasonable. I did it because I've tried many years to help people, and they don't seem to be particularly interested, neither my detractors, nor the police, nor the courts, in the fact that there's no predisposition, as evidenced by no sex talk, no dirty pictures, etc., or a reputation of the person, which you would think if they really wanted, if they really wanted to make sure that they got the right person, they would look at your entire history, your reputation. But they don't when that's inconvenient. When it's convenient to them, oh, they jump right on that. They're happy to do that. So these complaints led to about 904 local case referrals. Very few federal, just a handful, a handful, 26, 27, and accepted for federal prosecution, 38. Okay. Um, let's see. One agency involved, let's see, how many did they have child victims identified? Well, in 2021, they claimed it was 91 in the proactive stings, but that dropped to 21 on the reactive stings, which dropped even more. And they just had a handful of prosecutions. Well, you can't have that. You've got to get those prosecutions up. So they had to take advantage of new techniques, and they needed to hear, this is my theory, from O.U.R. and others as to how they could accomplish that and rescue real children. And look, I've never not said, I never denied that real children aren't being harmed. I've said that. But they're doing far more harm to the greater citizenry by using the grant money and abusing the grant money to weave crimes around people who didn't do anything and had no predisposition to go after children at all. I'm looking at a note I have here, 22416 net nanny out in the Northwest claims to have rescued 3 kids ages 10 to 13. These are actual children being trafficked, not proactive children, not fake children, not anybody out there that somebody was trying to hurt by these proactive stings. It's difficult to make head or tail of some of these statistics from I.C.A.C because they're not very honest. They don't tell you, for example, well, I'll just read one here. Documented complaint under that category. Traveler, which is the proactive sting, supposedly. One of the elements of that is they get you to go and see the person. Okay, they get you to do that. And by the way, it's not very complicated. It's not like, aha, you shouldn't have gone. These are the same people who say that if you have small children at home, that they count those children as rescued children, your own children. So they not only set you up by pretending you were doing something illegal, but then they go and take your children and claim that your children were rescued from you, which is very interesting because there were never any complaints about you having sex with your own children. There was never anything like that, but they assume it. And if they assume it because the cop's word is law, then they get you. It's very interesting. So for the traveler one, the proactive stings, 108. So 108 claims based on police entrapping you, nudging you, pushing you along, all the things they claim they never do. We just sit there and we just wait for them to do something. A lie. Look for the reactive one, so 17. So 108 supposedly, but 17 actually did something. Okay. And by the way, previous year, the actual ones 14, 13, 19. We're not talking about the hundreds and thousands that they claim were always the case. Again, if it's one, it's too many. We don't want children abused, but we can't assume that violating somebody's constitutional rights, framing them for a crime they never intended to do, is somehow protecting children. That's absurd. And yet, that's what I've heard from other people. So we look at, the cyber tips, 5,108 down to just a handful of people who are actually prosecuted. We know that the missing and exploited children has NCMEC has something like 200,000 or something I read here. Not very much. Even the search warrants are very, very low. Okay. Training sessions provided to law enforcement, 314 in that same year. Okay. Community outreach, lots of times they went to community outreach. But even their community outreach, 544 early on in 2008, and they had 5,251 in attendance at 544 events. That doesn't sound like it's very much. Well, what you have to do then is you have to gin up the stats. So they ginned them up And by 2021, you had 17 public events and 1,154 people attending. So, again, ICAC has figured out all sorts of fascinating ways to keep the money flowing. I want to just end here. Like I said, I could talk a lot about this, but here's some great recent articles about allegations O.U.R. covered up rape of minors and funded forced abortions that their own people did. You rescue these people, supposedly. Many of them weren't even endangered, they were just poor or they were indigent. And then you invite them to sex parties, which Tim Ballard would create. And then all the people would have sex with them because they had gained the trust of these children. And since these children supposedly had been used to it, or they had been having sex with people, or they had not been having sex with people and were coerced into it, they were confused, as children would be. They didn't know until they grew older, and then they realized what had happened. And now here's the result of it. So, breaking allegations, Operation Underground Railroad covering up funding rape of 13-year-olds in Haiti and forcing abortions on them. Okay. Um, Project Rescue Children exposes latest in series of human trafficking hoaxes. The group reportedly faked rescue stories, including one involving a baby saved from traffickers, and lied about where funds were going off into their lavish parties and to their own pockets, not to extensive, sophisticated rescue operations. Rescue Children. This is out of July 2024, an article in the online publication The Reason. Ex-police officer fake child trafficking stories. This is MSNBC, MSN, excuse me, .com news of July 2024. Naomi Campbell named in Jeffrey Epstein documents. She was a Save the Children charity and now been exposed for misusing those funds. Again, plenty of gravy going around. 8 October 2024, police in Guatemala raided 5 regional offices of British aid agency Save the Children on Monday as part of an investigation to alleged child abuse. Okay. So we have all of these other interesting companion or affiliated organizations getting in on the act. More than 40 Save the Children international staff sacked, fired over abuse, bullying, and safeguarding situations. A July 26, 2022 article in www.thirdsector.co.uk. An anti-trafficking group founder pleads no contest to fraud, theft, and fraudulent donation use. So taking the donations and lining your pocket, August 22nd, 2024. Ashton Kutcher leaves non-profit group combating child trafficking over Danny Masterson controversy, Washington Examiner, September 15th, 2023. There's tons of these articles, folks, tons of them. They're all over the place. And what it indicates, again, is a connection between all of these groups who as I have argued before, to much scorn and derision, are propped up by public approbation, by looking good, by trying to be the good guys. And in fact, what's happening is something quite different. So Ballard is now on the line. He's being sued by multiple entities. He is doubling down, as far as I've been able to see, on the arguments. The funding that went to I.C.A.C and to University of Utah, et cetera, and Metcalf, these MECTEF, excuse me, these groups have started backing away from Ballard because now, of course, he's radioactive. Keep following this story, folks. It's not about what they're telling you. It's not about saving children. It's not about getting people who are supposedly pedophiles, who have no inclination, desire, or history of ever doing anything like that. And you have to wonder in the second Trump administration what we're going to have. What are we going to have exactly? Are we going to have Trump and company out there propping Ballard up, lying more? Now, we had 30,000 lies during his first administration, not to mention the interregnum period in between administrations. What's he going to do this time, you wonder? And how will the police be propped up to go after your sons and your daughters and your LGBTQ youth and others, all in the name of saving children, saving women, or whatever nonsense they want to feed you? This is Norman Michaelation on the 7th of November, 2024. Have a wonderful day.